Hi everyone, welcome to the Celebrity Diaries. Malcolm X, one of the most powerful figures of the 20th century, was a man who rose from the profundities of destitution and wrongdoing to become a progressive chief who tested the actual texture of American society. In this video, we will investigate the untold story of Malcolm X. The man behind the symbol will plunge into the secret of his unexpected and fierce passing. Looking at the speculations that have endured for a really long time, we'll likewise investigate the house that was once his asylum, presently deserted and rotting, and ask what insider facts get it done, still hold, and lastly we'll uncover the total assets of a not man for riches, however, for equity, and whose impact keeps on molding the world long after his passing. Every one of the subtleties you really want are solidly in this video. We should make a dive now. Malcolm X, a persuasive American Muslim minister and common freedoms pioneer, had total assets of around $150,000 at the hour of his passing in 1965, which is adapted to expansion today as a strong speaker. His talks drew in huge crowds across the U.S. and universally, procuring him huge pay from talking charges. His persevering support for dark strengthening and social liberties not just made him a vital figure in the battle against racial disparity, but also improved his public profile, prompting more monetary potential and opening doors. One of the significant sources of his abundance was his coordinated effort with writer Alex Haley on the self-portrayal of Malcolm X. The book, which was distributed after his death, immediately turned into a hit and is as yet viewed as an exemplar in African-American writing. The eminences from the book gave monetary help to his loved ones following his heartbreaking demise, while his various media appearances and addresses cemented his inheritance, guaranteeing that his impact and monetary standing persevered long after his passing. Malcolm X conceived Malcolm Minimal on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, and would proceed to become one of the most compelling figures in the battle for racial equity and equity in America. Malcolm was the fourth of 7 youngsters brought into the world. To Louise Helen Little, initially from Grenada, and Duke Little, a Baptist pastor from Georgia. His guardians were effectively engaged with African-American moderate developments. What's more, his dad was a forerunner in the General Negro Improvement Affiliation, an association established by Marcus Garvey. Because of Lord's initiative and activism, the family confronted continuous dangers from racial oppressor bunches, like the Ku Klux family. These dangers constrained them. Little family to move to Michigan to get away from the mounting risks. Anyway, their difficulties were far from over. When Malcolm was only 6 years old, misfortune struck his dad kicked the bucket in what as authoritatively named as a mishap. However, his mom Louise smelled a rat. She trusted that Lord's passing was the aftereffect of an assault by the Dark Army, a white segregationist bunch that had badgering the family for a really long time. This horrible misfortune was only the start of a progression of disturbances for Malcolm and his family. In 1938, when Malcolm was just 13, his mom experienced a mental meltdown, and as a result, the youngsters were put in childcare, isolated from each other. In spite of these early difficulties, Malcolm's scholarly mongrosity started to come to fruition during his school years. He went to West Middle School and later Bricklayer Secondary School. However, his intellectual venture was defaced by prejudice and debilitation at one point. An educator let him know that his goal of becoming a legal counselor was unreasonable for an individual of color. This bigoted remark squashed Malcolm's dreams and driven him to exit school between the ages of 14 and 21. He floated, starting with one unspecialized temp job, then on to the next, encountering the cruel real factors of life. It was during this time that Malcolm, looking for a new way, moved to New York City's Harlem neighborhood in 1943. During these early years in New York, Malcolm X became engaged with insignificant wrongdoing, perpetrating thefts and different offenses. In 1946, his crimes prompted his capture, and he was condemned to time in Charlestown State Jail for robbery. What's more, breaking, and it was in to enter at jail. Such Malcolm's reality started to take a critical turn. While detained, he met John, a prisoner who was self-instructed and acquainted Malcolm with the universe of books. This experience ignited Malcolm's energy for perusing, which would shape his future and fuel his scholarly advancement. Around the same time, Malcolm started getting letters from his family about the country of Islam, which was a strict development that taught dark confidence, racial pride, and strengthening. Charmed by the development's lessons, Malcolm started relating with Elijah Muhammad, the head of the country. In 1948, he authoritatively joined the NOI, accepting the name Malcolm X, as was standard for supporters of the development, representing the deficiency of his African tribal family name. This shift denoted the start of a significant change in Malcolm's life, both profoundly and strategically. Malcolm X was paroled in 1952, and he, before long, moved to Detroit, where he turned into the associate clergyman of the country's public sanctuary. Number 1. His persuasive abilities and unfaltering obligation to the noise standards immediately moved him to conspicuousness as the country's prominence developed. Malcolm assumed an essential part in laying out new sanctuaries in urban communities across the East Coast. Anyway, Malcolm's developing impact didn't be ignored by the U.S. government. The FBI started to screen him intently, particularly after he composed a letter from jail to President Truman, in which he communicated his resistance to the Korean conflict and transparently pronounced himself a socialist regardless of being under a magnifying glass. Malcolm's ascent inside the country proceeded with Ed, and by the last part of the 1950s, he had turned into a main figure operating at a profit as a patriot. Development by the mid-1960s, Malcolm X's perspectives had begun to advance. He turned out to be progressively baffled with the country of Islam, especially with its chief, Elijah Muhammad, in 1964. After a time of reflection and profound investigation, Malcolm freely reported his takeoff from the country while he stayed a Muslim. He no more bought into the rebel philosophy of the country of Islam commemorations, while his public inheritance is indisputable. The actual spots tied to his life tell a calmer yet similarly convincing story. The humble house at 3448 Pinckney Road in North Omaha was the main home of Malcolm Little and his quick family. Tragically, the house's verifiable importance was not dependably perceived in 1965. New proprietors obliterated the design, ignorant about its association with the youthful Malcolm X. Anyway, acknowledgement came many years, some other time, when the site was added to the public register of noteworthy spots in 1984. Today, a Nebraska verifiable marker recognizes the area, guaranteeing its story remains part of the more extensive account of Malcolm X's life, later leaving Nebraska. Malcolm's excursion took him to Boston, Massachusetts, where he lived with his stepsister, Ella Little Collins. The house, situated in the Roxbury area, turned into a significant part in his change in acknowledgement of its verifiable significance. The Malcolm X Ella Little Collins house was added to the public register of memorable spots in 2021, a deserted house in Nebraska. A less popular piece of Malcolm X's history includes one more house in Nebraska, accepted to have been claimed by him before his death in 1965. Not at all like the commended locales in Omaha and Boston, this property has remained covered in secret. There is no authoritative proof that Malcolm of all time lived there, yet its relationship with his name has made it a focal point for history specialists and admirers. Alike, the house, deserted throughout recent decades, remains as an eerie remnant of the past. Inside the desolate, the time is obvious. Walls are stripping wooden floors. Rivulet underneath, and the roof gives indications of serious harm, while the construction may have lost its previous essentialness. It remains a strong image of the persevering interest in Malcolm X's life and heritage, individual life, while profoundly interweaving his public activism and convictions, likewise conveying components of affection, family, and individual development. His connections, especially with his better half Betty Sanders. In 1955, Malcolm met Betty Sanders, a lady who might turn into a vital figure in his life. Their gathering happened after one of Malcolm's messages. Also, Betty, who was at first interested in his message, started going to his talks consistently as she developed more dedication to the lessons of the country of Islam. Now Betty went with the choice to switch over completely to the religion in 1956. After joining the country, she took on the name Betty X, an emblematic signal mirroring the NOI's act of supplanting African American tribal family names with the letter X to connote the deficiency of their African legacy. In 195-8, following quite a long while of knowing each other, Malcolm proposed to Betty via telephone. Their commitment was followed by a speedy yet significant marriage, only 2 days after the fact. The couple's marriage was Howard, with 6 little girls, further setting their family as a focal point of support in Malcolm's life. Their youngsters turned into a significant piece of his inheritance, addressing not just his individual obligation to family, yet additionally, the more extensive tradition of his work to get a superior future for dark Americans. Dangers as the strain between Malcolm and the country heightened in 1964. All through the year, the dangers against Malcolm X turned out to be more unmistakable, and directly in February 1964, ahead of the 7th Sanctuary, a group of the country of Islam requested a bomb to be put in Malcolm X's vehicle. This was only one of a few admonitions demonstrating the developing ill will between him and the country and an association. Thanks for watching this video.